All right, let's just jump right in. So, have you ever made a decision that you were absolutely 100% certain was yours, only to realize later that you were subtly, almost invisibly guided there? Really think about it. Somebody got you to do exactly what they wanted without giving an order, without forcing you, and honestly, without even starting an argument.
Now, you might be thinking it's some sort of magic mind control, but no, it's just reverse psychology. In this explainer, we're going to explore a truly fascinating breakdown of human behavior by looking at 13 Machiavellian laws of influence. Historically, the great strategists in politics, business, and even just in everyday relationships have used these exact concepts. Some people call it manipulation, right? Others call it psychological strategy. But the simple truth is, until you actually understand how the human mind naturally reacts to things, you literally can't understand the invisible forces of influence that are all around us.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for the explainer. We've clustered these laws into 5 core themes: the illusion of control, ego and identity, the power of silence, perception and scarcity, and finally, strategic weakness. Think of this as your complete guide to understanding those invisible forces of the mind.
Let's start with theme 1, the illusion of control. Why autonomy outsmarts authority. You see, the human mind fundamentally hates direct orders. When someone tells us, hey, do this right now, this tiny, stubborn voice of resistance wakes up inside of us. We naturally crave autonomy. We want independence. We absolutely need to feel like we're the ones in the driver's seat.
And this brings us right to the illusion of choice. Think about it like this. If a parent issues a direct command to a kid, something like, go study math right now, the child naturally pushes back. They want to make excuses, they delay. But if that same parent simply asks, would you like to study math or science first, the whole dynamic completely flips. Suddenly, the child feels like they have the power, so their brain actually stops trying to escape studying and instead focuses on picking a subject. The crazy truth? Both of those choices lead exactly where the parent wanted them to go in the first place. Giving people the illusion of choice completely bypasses their natural resistance because, well, the mind feels like it's in control.
But wait, freedom actually has a bit of a dark side. It's called the anxiety of freedom. We usually walk around thinking that having more choices is going to make us happier, right? Well, human psychology shows the exact opposite. Just picture sitting at a restaurant. If you only have 5 items to choose from, you make a clear, confident decision and you feel good about it. But if you have 50 items, you get hit with choice overload. You freeze up. You start agonizing over whether you're going to pick the wrong thing. All that mental fatigue causes real decision anxiety. So sometimes the absolute most influential thing you can do isn't offering endless possibilities, but actually limiting the options to create a super clear, comfortable path forward. Which perfectly sets up this next concept, the implanted idea. It turns out people will fiercely defend an idea if they believe they came up with it themselves. If you just walk up and give someone direct advice, they're probably going to push back. But if you casually ask a leading question, something like, do you think there might be a more efficient way to handle this? You're forcing their brain to process the question on its own. When they finally arrive at the conclusion themselves, it triggers what psychologists call self-generated persuasion. It's like you secretly planted a seed, but they watered it and grew the idea. That makes it the most powerful kind of influence there is. Moving right along to theme 2, ego and identity, the invisible shield of self-image. A massive, and I mean massive, part of human behavior is desperately driven by our need to protect, validate, and boost our own ego. We all carry around this story in our heads about who we are, and we'll do practically anything to keep that story perfectly intact. And that brings us to a really interesting concept known as the mirror of narcissism. Basically, every single person on Earth wants to feel understood and appreciated. When you reflect someone's ideal self-image back to them, they will naturally bend their own behavior to match it. So if you tell someone, wow, you are such a highly responsible person, they will subconsciously try their hardest to live up to that label. Why? Because of self-image theory. Nobody wants to shatter that positive image that they and everyone else believes to be true. Showing someone their best self is honestly the fastest way to get them to actually become it. But, what happens when standard praise just isn't cutting it? Praise is great and all, but sometimes a tiny little seed of doubt is actually the ultimate motivator. We call it an ego challenge. Picture a coach looking at a tired athlete and saying, you know what, maybe you just aren't ready for this level yet. That triggers an immediate visceral ego response. The athlete immediately thinks, oh, I'll prove you wrong. Suddenly, their goal isn't just finishing the drill anymore. It becomes completely about defending their identity.
When it's used carefully, challenging someone's ego unlocks this hidden, massive reserve of energy that normal praise just literally cannot reach. All right, let's look at theme 3, the power of silence, letting the void do the heavy lifting. In our super fast-paced modern world, we tend to think that being influential means talking the loudest, having the quickest comeback, and just dominating every conversation. But actually, scratch that. Some of the absolute most profound psychological strategies require you to just step back entirely. This starts with what we call strategic surrender. Okay, picture this. You're in a really heated argument. Voices are getting loud, defenses are way up. At this point, the other person isn't even listening to a word you're saying. They just desperately want to win. But what happens if you just stop and calmly say, "Perhaps you are right"? The effect is basically instantaneous. That person has spent all this energy building a massive mental fortress to fight you, and you just casually took away the entire war. Their defensive walls immediately drop. Without the pressure of your opposition pushing against them, they'll often start to moderate their own views. Stepping back isn't a weakness. It's a highly calculated move to diffuse toxic resistance. And then there is the pure, absolute power of silence. Did you feel that? The human brain literally hates an empty void. When you just stop talking, let's say you're in a job interview or a tough negotiation, and you've just made your offer, and you just wait. It creates this massive, heavy psychological pressure. The other person gets incredibly uncomfortable. They start wondering what on earth you're thinking. And to relieve that crushing anxiety, they will almost always start talking just to fill the void. They'll end up oversharing information, or sometimes they'll even start negotiating against themselves. It's wild. Next up is theme 4, perception and scarcity. Value is an illusion of contrast and limits. How do we even figure out what something is worth? Well, the source material makes it crystal clear. Value is almost never objective. I mean, think about it. Why did Adam and Eve eat the apple? Simple, because it was forbidden. This is called psychological reactance. It's a mental reaction that kicks in the second we feel our freedom is being limited. When something is banned or even just restricted, it doesn't just create a boundary. It creates this intense, burning curiosity. Our brain immediately says, well, if I'm not allowed to have this, it must be totally incredible. This is exactly why limited edition or exclusive invite-only marketing works so flawlessly on us. Scarcity literally turns completely ordinary things into obsessions. Now let's talk about the contrast principle. Let's say an expert negotiator is trying to make a deal with you. They are never going to start with their actual target price. Instead, they anchor your brain to this extreme, heavily inflated number, like let's say 80,000 rupees. Instantly, your brain registers that and goes, whoa, that is wildly expensive. But then, boom, they drop the price down to 50,000. Suddenly, your brain is like, oh, 50,000? That feels totally reasonable. Honestly, it might even be a bargain. But think about it. If they had just started out at 50,000 right out of the gate, you absolutely would have fought to lower it. The contrast principle proves we never really judge value in a vacuum. We're always judging it based on whatever we just saw a second ago. Which naturally brings us to the scarcity principle and this concept of strategic withdrawal. Look, if you are always available, always the very first person to reply to a text, always just hovering around, people are inevitably going to start taking you for granted. Your presence just becomes a background habit to them. But if you practice strategic withdrawal, purposely stepping back at the right moments, people suddenly feel your absence. The perceived value of your time and your presence shoots way up, simply because it isn't infinitely available to them anymore. And finally, theme 5, strategic weakness. The incredibly counterintuitive power of appearing incapable. Now, society constantly drills into us that we need to always look strong, overly confident, and totally flawless. But psychologically speaking, always appearing incredibly powerful can actually paint a giant target right on your back. It makes people super defensive and guarded whenever you're around. So enter the false weakness strategy. It's brilliant. If you walk into a room acting like this aggressive, cutthroat shark, the other side is immediately going to hide their true hand. But if you follow these steps, if you just appear totally ordinary, maybe even act a little bit unsure of yourself, the other person's mental security systems literally power down. They think, oh, this person isn't a threat at all. And because they suddenly feel superior to you, they completely lower their guard. They start talking way more openly, and they end up revealing their true positions. You're gaining the ultimate advantage simply by putting your strength in disguise. You see this all the time at work, right? First, you have the expert. This is the person who goes out of their way to prove they can do absolutely everything perfectly. And what's their reward? They just get dumped with everyone else's extra work until they burn out. On the flip side, you have what we call controlled incompetence. This person is totally brilliant at their core essential job, but they intentionally pretend to lack skills in all the trivial, annoying areas. By just saying, "Oh man, I'm really not the best at setting up that specific spreadsheet," they completely protect their energy and avoid getting overburdened. Honestly, sometimes the absolute smartest thing you can do is pretend you don't know how to do something.
All right, bringing it all together with our conclusion, influence versus manipulation. We've covered some incredibly potent psychological mechanisms in this explainer, from the clever illusion of choice all the way to controlled incompetence. Remember, these laws are educational tools. They're designed to help us decode the reality of human nature. They explain why we react the way we do, why our emotions hijack us, and why pure perception so often beats actual reality. True understanding comes from recognizing these long-term patterns playing out in your everyday life.
Because understanding these psychological patterns doesn't just pull back the curtain on the sneaky tactics of marketers, negotiators, and leaders. It actually pulls back the curtain on your own mind. The next time you feel this sudden burning urge to prove someone wrong, or you freeze up because you have too many choices, you're finally going to know exactly why it's happening. So I'm going to leave you with this one question to think about. Will you use this knowledge to try and control the people around you, or will you use it to finally understand yourself? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning